the pros on there? Any work?
I'm just going to record it and we can post it later.
Okay, we'll have to record it and post it later. So anyhow, anyway. Technology, wonderful, wonderful thing that it is. Hey, listen, I'm glad you're here today, and I hope you've been in prayer for our service. We're talking about what I labor for, and we know that there are several times in the Bible that the Gospels repeat themselves. In other words, Mark will say something, Matthew, Luke, and John. And we know of two events that happened that are reported on by a couple different of the Gospels, and that was when Jesus fed a multitude. We know he did it twice. He fed one multitude that was a multitude of Gentiles. We talked about that on our Wednesday night study. If you haven't been coming, you're missing out on a real blessing. We only have 3 more studies left. And then he fed another one that was primarily, or pretty much all Jewish people as well. And this one is talked about, discussed in great detail in the Gospel of John. So we're going to look a little bit in a moment in John chapter 6, but I just want to give you a little bit of a background about what took place. After he fed this particular multitude, he left them and crossed over water. As a matter of fact, this is whenever he encountered Peter. Peter came to him or tried to come to him and fell and sunk and so forth. So we know a lot about what happened. As a matter of fact, he was on the island by himself, or in this area by himself, and he had sent the disciples on ahead, and he decided he would join them after they crossed over. Now, he didn't really explain to the disciples how he was going to get there, but nevertheless, they saw him walking on the water. The bad thing was, or I said it was a bad thing, the inconvenient thing, I should say, is for all the people he left behind. Because they woke up the next day thinking Jesus certainly had to be there, because they had seen the disciples leave the boat, and there was no other boats for him to get on. But then, hey, lo and behold, Jesus wasn't there. They searched the area, they didn't find him. And Jesus had crossed over. Of course, he had the ability to walk upon the water, and that's how he did it. So they all decided to get in their own boats and go find him. So they went, I guess, in the direction the disciples went, thinking he must be with the disciples. We'll catch up with him later. So anyway, I want us to pick up a little bit with what happens after that. John chapter 6, verse 25 through 29. John chapter 6, verse 25 through 29. And these people, the multitude that Jesus had fed the day before, it says, when they found him on the other side of the lake, they asked him, Rabbi, when did you get here? I think I'd be saying, Rabbi, how did you get here? I can't believe that you are here. But Rabbi, when did you get here? I want you to look at what Jesus said. Very truly, I tell you, you are looking for me not because you saw the signs I performed. What signs is he talking about? Well, primarily feeding the multitude with just 5 loaves and 2 fish. He says, that's not why you're looking for me. You're not looking for me because of the signs I performed, but because you ate the loaves and had your fill. In other words, he's saying you're hungry and you're looking for me, much like you and I might look for a McDonald's on the way on a long trip. You know, what's coming up? What do they got here? Is there a McDonald's in there? Is there a Burger King? What do you like? Is there a Chick-fil-A? Well, it's Sunday, we can't go there. And things like that. You're driving along, you're looking at this. I'm looking for something to eat. And that's what Jesus says. You're just looking for me because you ate the loaves, the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. All that I got out of that, you ate some of that, and you had your fill, and you're hungry again. Look what he says next. Do not work. The King James Version says labor. I'm going to use that a lot today. They're interchangeable, though. Do not work. Do not labor for food that spoils, but for food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. For on him God the Father has placed his seal of approval. Then they, meaning the multitude, asked him, what must we do to do the works God requires? And Jesus answered, the work of God is this, to believe in the one he sent. Now that word seems very simple and almost elementary, to believe. It's more to obey, to follow. To follow, not just believe. A lot of people believe Jesus walked the earth. A lot of people believe Jesus died and was resurrected. And if you say you believe in Jesus, they'll say, yeah, I believe in Jesus, but they're not obeying Jesus. They're not following Jesus. There is a difference there. And that subtle difference is felt here in this particular passage. He says that you need to believe, obey, follow the one that the Father has sent. That's what God requires. When have you been so preoccupied that you missed something? I remember in November of 1976, I had to look this up. I'm not this smart, believe me. But in November of 1976, particularly the day, I can tell you, November the 20th, 1976, I remember the day. I didn't remember it was that day. But anyhow, I was 8 years old. And now, some of you know that my grandfather, who was the evangelist many years ago, he was a huge Duke Blue Devil fan, enormous Duke fan. And when I was, I don't need to hear any of that garbage. Anyway, so when I was 7, he started taking me to Wallace Wade Stadium. And we would go to Wallace Wade Stadium and we'd watch Duke Blue Devils play. And then in 1976, like I said, I made my first trip to Keenan Memorial Stadium at Carolina. Now, there's a big difference between Wallace Wade Stadium at Duke and Keenan Memorial Stadium at Carolina. Big difference. Wallace Wade is one level, looks like a horseshoe. Back then it had wooden seats that were just long benches. You used to get splinters in your fanny, so you had to bring things to sit on. And Keenan Stadium was double-decker. It was just amazing how much bigger it was. But I remember I went down there with a lot of my family. We went to see Duke play Carolina. Neither one of these teams, this is back in the 70s when, the biggest you probably got to in the ACC was you might play one bowl game, either at the Gator Bowl or at the Peach Bowl in Atlanta. So we're not talking about two teams that were powerhouses when Duke went down to play Carolina in November of 1976. But I went down there, and I remember I was excited because I'd never been to Keenan Stadium, and back then it didn't look like this picture. That side there was not even, there wasn't stands there. There was a field house there, an old field house, but it was open. They actually had to bring in stands to put at the other end. And there were old, if you ever went there in the 70s, there was beautiful old fall trees that surrounded the stadium. They'd torn them down to put all the, why would you put fans in those seats? Why not just keep the trees there, right? Anyway. They know what they're doing, don't they? So what we did was we went to the game. And I remember it was a very fast-moving game, a lot of offense. I do remember all this. And I recall that it seemed as though things were winding down. Both teams had kind of worn each other down. And I remember late in the game, in the fourth quarter, Duke was ahead, and it was 38-31. Carolina was driving, and they ran out of downs, or they... the drive stalled. They went for it on fourth down and failed, and they were in Duke territory. And I remember my grandfather, he was really particular about, get your coats, let's beat the crowd. That was the way it was. So anyhow, I remember he said, all right. It seemed like Duke was going to win the game. Carolina had turned the ball over on downs. So we reached up, got our coats, and we started to walk out the stadium towards the car. We parked about half a mile away, and if you've ever been to the University of North Carolina, it used to be a lot of brick pathways. And I remember walking these brick pathways, and I kid you not, we had probably gone about 0.2 of a mile, and all of a sudden we hear the crowd erupt. And my dad was walking along with me, and I'll never forget, he looked down at me and said, well, Duke just turned the ball over. And so, my grandfather's still just getting it down to the car, so I'm thinking, well, I guess we're still going to the car, Even though I heard that great roar, a lot was going on in Keenan Stadium, but we were walking to the car. And then about another 2 minutes pass, and I hear another huge eruption from Keenan Stadium, and my dad said, well, Carolina just scored. My grandfather's still just walking to his car. And I'm thinking, well, Duke's ahead then 38-37. My dad looks at me and says, now they'll go for 2. Because see, in those days you could tie. It wasn't like overtime today. He said, I'll bet Carolina goes for 2. So we're walking along, and this is what's so funny. We're walking, we're not even paying attention to where we're going. All we're doing is listening. And all of a sudden we hear, yeah! We knew, oh my gosh, they have come back and Carolina is ahead. Well, there was less than 5 minutes to play when we left, and we're just about to get to the car. I had 2 cousins, and they were standing by the car because we knew if my grandfather said we were going to leave at this time, you better be at the car at this time. 2 of my cousins are standing at the car. They've got it, I don't know how they got a key, but they've got it turned on. They said, Carolina's up by 1 with less than a minute to play. We had missed the whole end of the game. We missed what we came to see. Why do you go to a ball game? To see who wins, right? And we missed it all. We were preoccupied. We were doing something else. We were walking to the car, and we were listening to it, and all of the excitement I missed. I remember that today very clearly. I remember getting to the car and listening to the rest of it. Carolina held on and won the game, even though it looked like there was no way that they could do it. The end of the game, the whole reason that you came I missed it. Some of us get caught up in television series. And the series finale is coming on. And we're all set for it. But something comes up at the last minute, and we miss it. I'm looking back there at some of my bachelor friends. Right? Yeah, I know. I don't watch The Bachelor, The Bachelorette. I'm not into that. But I know some of you are. Oh, I was going to see that, and I missed it. In a more practical sense, we look around at our family one day, and we realize that our child is almost as tall as we are. And we think, when did that happen? When did that happen? I don't even remember that. Where was I when all this was going on? Tragedies whenever husbands or wives come together in the evening and they realize there's no love there. When did you stop loving me? Where was I when this happened? I missed it. It happens. There's times when we as parents say, how long has this been going on? And often it happens because we're too busy at our labor. The labor which we think is so important, but which too often turns out to be that which is for the day, the temporal, not the eternal. What Jesus was talking about. What causes us to labor so much for the temporary and so little for the eternal? We have to admit that we must do the temporal in order to live. We have responsibilities. We understand that. We have things we've got to get done. Paul tells us to work in 2 Thessalonians, and that if we don't work, then we shouldn't eat. And Paul tells us in Colossians in the New Testament also to work as unto the Lord. And whatever we do, we're really working for an audience of one. Work as unto the Lord, whatever we do, be honest, have integrity in everything that we do. But somewhere along the line, we began to do what Jesus warned us about. We began to labor a great deal more for food that spoils than that which endures. It's funny because the multitude that came looking for Jesus because they wanted to eat were seeking out fish sandwiches more than they were seeking the one to fulfill the prophecies that their parents, their grandparents, generations for 4,000 years have been talking about. They weren't really interested in finding him anymore. They were interested in getting something to eat. So what does endure? I heard once the sale of durable goods was up. You know what durable goods are? Durable goods are the things that last around 3 or more years, like an automobile. Like a car. It's funny. When you think about a car, and you get that new car, and it smells so good, you know, and I'm going to wash this car every week. I'm going to wax this car. I'm going to put premium in the car, right? You get that new car home, and you park it in such a way you don't, when you go to the Walmart, you're one of the jerks that takes up 4 parking spaces, right? You got to turn diagonally in a vertical space, right? Yeah, I know. And you think, I'm going to take care of this one. The old one may have gotten old and deteriorated, but this one, I'm going to take care of it. Yeah, right. Yeah. Then what happens? You've had it for about 3, 4 months, 5, 6 months, and you get a little ding in the door, and oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened. But then after about a year, you don't even notice that ding anymore because there's another one on the other side. Right? You know what I'm talking about. It's the way it is. I remember, it can be the same with a house. I remember when we moved into our house, and it was a new house, and we thought, hey, we're going to keep this house looking pristine. It's going to look so nice. And we had 2 little girls. It's impossible. But they each had a bedroom, and I remember, one time we got a bad scratch on one of the walls. Now, we'd lived there for some time by the time the scratch got there. Otherwise, I would run out to the garage. We still had a little paint that would match, If it had been the first week or the first month, I'd have been down there trying to make it match and make it look so right. Listen, man, all I did was move a chair. That's the way it is. It's not long before we give up putting premium in the gas tank. These are durable goods, but as time passes, brother, it gets harder and harder to make sure that we do everything we should do regularly. Like changing the oil in the car, we figure, hey, it's smoking, but that means it's running, so that's good enough to get me where I'm going. These are the things, though, that we labor for. And these are the durable goods. These are more than just the trinkets that we buy on a regular basis. Sometimes we think about our occupation. Why do I preach? Is it just so I can get a paycheck every week? Or is it because I think there's really something important to be said that's transformational about this book? Is there a need here that I'm trying to meet? Do I do it because I love the Lord and because I want to do what's right in His eyes and I want to labor for that which is eternal? Or do I just want a paycheck? And we can apply that to anyone. Why do you do what you do? Is it God's will that you work where you work? Is it God's will that you're where you are? Do you know that? Do you labor for that? Do you try to do your best possible job? Not so that it will please the customer, but that you can stand before God Almighty and He can say, well done, good and faithful servant. You've obeyed in something small, now I'm going to put you over something bigger. Why do you even do what you do? Look back there on the Bob, you're a tremendous bricklayer. You want to ask someone like that, you want to say, Bob, are you building a building or are you just laying bricks? That's the way our lives are sometimes. Are we building something that's going to last, or are we just laying bricks? Just here for the moment. Something temporary. What are we laboring for? Jesus speaks of the eternal things. And when I talk about the eternal things, it's hard to think about what lasts to eternity. Not much. But there must be some things, because Jesus talks about it. Labor for that which lasts to eternal life. If you have trouble thinking of something, I want you to do something for me today. Pretend your house is on fire. It's a terrible thing to think about, but pretend it. And I guess we can even relate with some of our brothers and sisters out west and what they experienced, the tragedy of seeing their houses destroyed. Think about that. But think for just a moment of yourself standing outside of your house. Now, I know this would never happen. But I want you to think that you're watching your house burn, and a fireman standing there with you looks at you and says, I'll tell you what, you got 30 seconds to run in and get whatever you can. Like I said, I know that would never happen. If you're out of the house, you're never supposed to go back in. But let's just say, for argument's sake, most of us would probably think to grab the same thing. It wouldn't be a television set. It wouldn't be a computer. It wouldn't be a sound system. It wouldn't be some of the higher dollar items in your house. It wouldn't be artwork. It wouldn't be anything like that. What would it probably be? Probably pictures, wouldn't it? Yeah. Now we're getting close. See, pictures, they're just paper, and eventually pictures fade. Eventually they shrivel, and they don't look as good. They get crinkled and so forth. But that's what a lot of us would do, because pictures we think couldn't be replaced. Even though they don't last for eternity, they stir up memories in us. And barring us having memory problems, we'll look at those pictures and we'll think, oh yeah, I recall this. This is something precious to me. We're getting close now to things that are eternal. We're getting close. I'm not saying that those are eternal things, but they are feelings and emotions that get you through life. And they have eternal consequences. And they have the bearings of memories. They're things that the love and the care and the concern and the memories, they are things that I guess you could argue are eternal. But let's say we're standing out there and not everybody's with you that lives in the house. Let's say you're standing out there and the fireman says, okay, you can go in there and you've got about 30 seconds, and you notice that mom's not standing with you. Or you notice that one of the children aren't standing with you. You say, then what do you go in there and look for? You see, even the pictures take a backseat. You don't go in there and look for some comforter that was handed down through generations. You don't go in there looking for something that you can, some fancy dress that someone bought you, and you wanted to keep, or some shoes. Or you don't go in there looking for the Jordans, or you don't go in there looking for things that are high dollar. You go in there looking for what is eternal, and that is a soul. Let me ask you this morning, it sounds like a very simple question, but do you believe in eternity? Do you believe that there are eternal things? If you were given the opportunity to take one thing with you to heaven, what would it be? You see, the Bible tells me basically that everything here on this earth is burning. You just don't see it yet. Look at James 5, 2 and 3. James, of course, half-brother of Jesus, the disciple. Your wealth has rotted, and the moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. Their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. You have hoarded wealth in the last days. You have labored for that which you hoard, which testifies against the fact that you cared more for that which didn't last than that which lasts for eternity. You cared more about stocking up on the temporal than going into the fire and rescuing the eternal. 2 Peter 3:10. But the day of the Lord will come like a thief. The heavens will disappear with a roar. The elements will be destroyed by fire, and the earth, listen, the earth and everything done in it will be laid bare. In King James and other translations, it says will be burned up. I hate to break it to you, friend, but it's all burning up around you. Your home, your car, whatever you possess, the earth and everything, all your durable goods are on fire. And listen to me, God is standing and telling you, you have so long, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, maybe some of us 60 years, to go into the fire and save whatever you can before it's all burned. How foolish we would call someone who rushed in and grabbed something that wouldn't last in a fire situation. And yet, how preoccupied we are with storing up, with obtaining, with society's thoughts about what we possess, with having the latest, rather than rushing in to this dark world and pulling out of it that which needs saving, that is eternal. How foolish we are to not save the child, to not save the spouse. And I know it's not us doing the saving, but it is our testimony that leads them to the one who can save them. What would you label someone who risked life and limb for a shotgun when they could have easily saved a brother? And how warped are we when we work so hard for so long to obtain what perishes and neglect investing our time in prayer and witnessing and laboring for the eternal, the soul that is lost. I know that in life we get a lot of our identity and our jobs assist in our self-confidence. We work our job, we get a certain amount of pleasure from that, we get a certain amount of reputation and experience, and we feel good about what we can do. You know, we work a job, we learn that job, and then we can apply ourselves to a better job, and we feel like that's given us some experience, and self-confidence has developed. And I think that there's part of us that like to do and accomplish things on our own. We don't like charity. I think you see some of that really with what's going on. It's amazing in Western North Carolina. Some people, refused help because they don't like taking charity. A lot of people aren't good at that. But sometimes I think that we're not prideful. We use that as an excuse. When I look at this passage, I see a lot of people just hungry. And they basically were trying to finagle their way into charming Jesus into just giving them something to eat this second day. See, sadly, sometimes I think the church does a lot of that. Let's be honest, our biggest crowds are usually when we have breakfast or when we serve a meal. Because we're really not looking so much for Jesus as we're looking for that which satisfies me. Jesus speaks to us and we say, well, I'm pro-Jesus, but he's only the second. He's in second place right behind me. When Jesus will have first place or he'll have no place. Sometimes we seek to fill our appetite with a little Jesus during the week, make us feel better about ourselves. But like the people in the passage here, we're not interested in investing in him. We'll receive temporal goods from God's hand. We'll pray for them all the time. But there are few who are willing to receive the spiritual blessings and many less willing to labor for them. It's amazing to me how often I get backed up at the convenience store because people try and play the lottery and win the lottery. There are certain gas stations I hate to go to because I know, it's so funny, Crystal will be with me usually. We only have one car, And Crystal's with me and I'll go in to pay for the gas. I know, I can pay at the pump. You don't have to tell me all that stuff. But anyway, I go in and I take cash. And I go in but I'm standing there, man, and people, I'll take a 12 and a 10 and I'll take this 5 over here. And they ring up, $70 worth of cards to play the lottery. And I'm thinking, I just want $20 worth of gas. I'm thinking, no wonder you're playing the lottery. You're paying $70 a week for this. I'm paying $20 for gas. But it takes a long time, and it's amazing how people will take chances for the temporal. But they're less likely to take a chance for the eternal. Because they might look foolish. They might say the wrong thing. So they don't take those chances. Why are you looking for Jesus? Prior to this episode, it says that Jesus, after he had fed the crowd, he went and he dismissed them. He went alone to meet with his Father and pray with his Father alone. Went to kind of secluded. He withdrew himself, it says specifically. Why would he look for his Father at that moment? Things are going pretty good, it looks like, for Jesus. It's because Jesus had perspective on eternity. He knew that things looked really good, but there was a greater and a lasting plan that he needed to deliver. It wasn't just about the food that he was able to provide at that moment. See, sometimes we think that we've been blessed by God in the moment, and that's all that we needed. He answered my immediate need. But Jesus knew there was a greater need. There was a gospel need. There was a salvation need for these people. And the people missed this great blessing because they were busy looking in the spiritual, or in the cupboard, I should say, the physical cupboard, while the bread truck drove them by. It's important that you and I maintain an eternal perspective. It's not just about now. When we say the word labor, it conjures up more than word, doesn't it? Yeah. Women know what I'm talking about. When we say the word labor, it sounds like it's more difficult. It requires more application than just normal work. When you get home from the job, somebody says, "How was your day today?" "Boy, I worked really hard." But if they said, "Boy, I labored at what I did today," that sounds much more, that's more weight to it. It's more meaty. I labored at this. When you think of a woman in labor, that's hard stuff to watch. Especially men. It's hard stuff to watch. I can't imagine what it would be like to experience it firsthand. Okay, so ladies, I'm not even going to touch too long on this. But Jesus says that when the baby is born, we forget about the pain. Now, I know you don't forget entirely. But listen to this. If you didn't have a place to store it that God had given you, there would only be children. Every child would be an only child. Does that make sense? You have to look at that baby and love that baby and forget a lot of that pain, or else every child would be an only child. God somehow gave you the ability to go through labor and to do it again. Or there'd only be only children. It was painful. It took time. but you brought an eternal soul into the world. And I ask you, ladies, was it worth it? Can you think of another time when you labored over something eternal in a similar way? Just as you labored over that eternal soul, have you labored over an eternal soul that you didn't give birth to? Like a parent or a spouse? Have you, I watched a film yesterday called Little Boy, and some of you have seen it. And his dad, to make a long story short, his dad goes off to serve in the war, and he's wounded. And this little boy stays in California. He's just a tiny fella, and his faith is so great that he's going to get to come home. And he just keeps praying, send my dad home, and send my dad home. And I thought about the intensity of that little boy. And there was a priest in the story, and the little boy thinks he can move things by doing this. And the priest has a bottle, and he says, move the bottle. And the boy's trying to move the bottle with his mind, and the priest moves it for him. He says, I moved it because I saw how your faith was, and you wanted it moved so badly. I couldn't help but move it for you. And said, that's the way that God works. Sometimes he doesn't move the bottle. But have you ever labored with such a burden for a lost soul? The same sort of soul that occupies that baby. Have you ever labored that much? Some of you labored for hours. I know Crystal labored for hours with our firstborn child. And I thought, have I ever even labored for 8 hours over a lost soul? You know what? I have a feeling that if only one came to Christ, we'd think it was worth it. It's painful. It takes time. Have I ever labored like that? Have I ever labored for that which was eternal like that? One last thought. Men, you've seen a woman in labor. You've had responsibilities yourself, so I want to include everybody in this. Jesus spoke about each one of us when he said to follow him, those who are heavy laden, those who labor, and he'll give us rest. Follow me, he said. Today, let's be honest with God. What have we really labored for during our lives? Who have we really labored for? How many hours have we spent laboring for the temporal instead of the eternal? Have you spent most of your laboring lives laboring after that which was here today and going tomorrow, while sometimes letting the eternal pass you by? Jesus tells us the laborers are few, and he wants them, he needs them for his kingdom. He wants you to have a full life, but he wants you to seek him first. Otherwise, it's like buying a furniture for a house that's not there. You know, there are a lot of people in this world you can find when only they want something. And I have a feeling God feels that way a lot about Christians. They only look for me when they want something temporal, just like they looked for my son on that day. I want you to do something for me for just a second. I want you to imagine that a day comes when you're coming face to face with God in eternity. You know that's going to happen. And on your way, you have to walk a path in which you're in earshot of angels. As you approach the throne of God, you hear these angels start to sing out. You hear these angels start to shout. And you look around, and finally you're bold enough to ask God, hey, what just happened? What was all the shouting about? And he says, don't you understand? Your child just found Jesus as their Savior and gave their heart to him. And you, just like me, in November of 1976, think, here I missed it. The whole reason I was put here. Because I was preoccupied with something else. And it was the whole reason The whole reason. But I missed it because I spent all my time laboring for that which doesn't last. I missed the whole reason that I came, that God put me here. Because I labored not for that which was eternal, not trying to introduce them to the Lord, but just for what made me happy, just for what's burning up. Would you stand? Thank you for your attention today. I want you to bow your head with me.